It's very warm in here, and hopefully I can get this done before I sweat myself to death. Hello, and welcome back to the Unnamed Marvel Retrospective series, an ongoing series that started in December where I took a look at old non-MCU Marvel movies and see just how well they hold up to scrutiny, or my own personal biases. A side goal of this whole venture is finding out just how bad some of these movies are. Like, you think that Love and Thunder and Quantumania are bad? Wait till you see Fan4stick and Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance. Previously, I've covered the Fantastic Four movies and the Ghost Rider movies, and this whole thing is leading up to a big, giant video where I talk about all of the Fox X-Men movies. None of which I have seen. Not a single one. So if you're looking forward to seeing that, subscribe so that you don't miss it when it finally drops in like 4 years at this rate. Today though, this video is a bit shorter because we only have one movie to cover. Ang Lee's Hulk. That's right, you heard me say we. Because today, here to help me with this video is my good friend Pillar of Garbage. From the YouTube channel Pillar of Garbage. Say hi, Pillar.
Hi, Pillar.
Awesome. This'll be fun. Now where was I? Oh, yes, that's right. Hulk. Hulk is a fascinating movie to me as someone approaching it for the first time. I personally grew up with the much more simple MCU version of this character, but in recent years I've come to have a lot of appreciation for the much more complex and nuanced portrayal that is common to the comics and to other media like the cartoon Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Well, hey, that's the show I used to bang on about all the time. I'm interrupting, sorry.
Yes, I figured you might like that. So when I heard that Ang Lee, director of well-known dramatic films like Brokeback Mountain and Life of Pi, was attached to this project, I was intrigued to see what he could make of this character and the interesting conflicts he provided. However, what I didn't realize was that this was not a solo Ang Lee venture. Apparently, the creative team for this movie included, at one point or another and in no particular order, Avia Rod, Michael France, Jonathan Hensley, Joe Johnston, J.J. Abrams, Zach Penn, David Hayter, and then Ang Lee. Production for this movie started in the 90s, and by that I mean the year 1990, and was in development for 13 years before eventually being released. So this movie had a bit of a turbulent time in the production stages, let's just say. Now, it's a bit of a stigma in the entertainment industry that movies like this that go through quote-unquote development hell usually aren't very good at all. Sometimes though, this isn't the case. A lot of movies go through development hell and end up beating the odds by still being good, or at least enjoyable. Now the question is Hulk one of those movies? Well, let's just continue with the video, and you might find that Pillar and I have some conflicting thoughts.
Then an accidental overdose of gamma radiation alters his body chemistry.
In case you haven't seen this movie, here's what you need to know. In the 1960s, a man named David Bana does experimentation with various animals in order to try and discover the secret to immortality. These experiments are done on a military base run by one General Ross. During the course of these experiments, Banner is denied the chance to experiment on human subjects, so he starts to experiment on himself, which you know always goes well. Post-experimentation, he and his wife have a son named Bruce, and upon doing some blood tests, David finds out that he's given himself some nebulous genetic disease, and that the disease has spread to Bruce. To try and counteract this, David tries to evacuate the military base and then do something to his family that gets Bruce put up for adoption. We later find out that David tried to use the evacuation to kill Bruce. Instead of killing Bruce, he ends up killing his wife while she tries to save him. Oh no, I killed my wife instead of my 4-year-old son, what have I done? And then he gets sent to a mental hospital after that, cause yeah. 30 years later, Bruce, with a brand new surname from his adopted parents, is coincidentally working on a very similar project with the daughter of General Ross, Betty. I guess some things do really run in the family, like gruesome experimentation on animals, apparently. Oh, hey, it's Stan Lee. Anyway, keeping to the important parts, Bruce is working on an experiment when some shenanigans occur that lead to him getting exposed to a lethal dose of gamma rays. But for some unknown reason, he only ends up in the hospital instead of dying and even makes a full recovery, with even old injuries healing up. While he's in the hospital, however, he's visited by a weird old janitor guy who turns out to be his dad, the one that attempted to murder him and then was locked in an insane asylum. Yeah, that guy. Bruce doesn't recognize David when he tells the whole story, so obviously Bruce does not believe him. Upon returning back to work, Bruce decides to stare angrily and think about everything going wrong with his life. This influx of stress reaches a breaking point. and Bruce loses it, transforming into the jolly green giant himself, Hulk. Hulk then fucks some shit up, destroying Bruce's life's work because he was angry about his life's work. Awesome. He then goes home and sleeps off his Hulkism. After this point, things get a little weird story progression wise, so I'm going to try to blow through this pretty quick, point by point. The Army and Ross put Bruce under suspicion of destroying the lab because he did. And then a guy from a company that was trying to buy Bruce's experiments tries to fight him, which goes about as well as you would expect. Meanwhile, Betty goes to see David, who for all she knows is just a janitor, and he tells her about Bruce's growing problem. And then after she leaves, he sicks hulked up dogs after her. These two plotlines coincide as Hulk goes to save Betty from the dogs and then sleep it off. In return, Betty gives him over to Ross. Bunch of random shit happens, like Bruce and Betty talking things out and the Hulk being experimented on and then escaping. Jesus, the CGI is aged poorly. The Army chases Hulk to San Francisco, and during that chase, Hulk goes to space.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Then Betty calms him down and he surrenders to the Army once again. Meanwhile, David is getting up to all kinds of shenanigans, like attempting to recreate the accident that made Bruce the Hulk. Instead, he gives himself the ability to absorb the properties of whatever he touches, becoming the Absorbing Man. I don't think this is how the Absorbing Man comes to be in the comics, but other comic book movies have made much bigger alterations, so I'll allow it. The movie's now almost over, so we've got to have this giant final showdown. This comes in the form of a captured Bruce talking to David, who has agreed to be arrested by Ross so that he can do this talk with Bruce. David has this big speech about how he's better than everyone and how he's the peak of existence, and he asks Bruce to join him and all of that. He goes full Darth Vader to Bruce's Hulk, essentially. And then he sticks his finger into the outlet in order to absorb the electricity.
This is the ultimate showdown. Ultimate destiny, goodbyes, bad guys, and explosions. As far as the eye can see.
In a last hurrah, David tries to absorb Bruce, but it gives him a hernia and he explodes. Just like the base where this is all going down when the Army bombs it. Now the Army and Betty think Bruce is dead. We cut to an unspecified amount of time later, and Bruce is hiding out in South America and ends the movie making vague threats at mercenaries in the area.
Me está enojando. No le gustaría verme enojado.
A line shamelessly stolen from Morbius, of course.
I'm starting to get hungry. You don't want to see me when I'm hungry.
So with a lot of Marvel movies like this, it's pretty easy to parse the general consensus. Most people love the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and most people dislike Fan Four Stick. That all makes sense to me and is pretty immediately obvious. With Hulk, however, it's hard to figure out exactly what people think of it, because you'll find someone praising it as the best portrayal of the Hulk that they've ever seen, and then immediately after you'll find someone saying that it's utter garbage. POG and I really don't fall into either camp.
Though I do lean a little more toward the former side.
That being said, I'm not a huge fan of this movie, personally. To start with, I feel like this movie, to put it bluntly, is a bit of a mess. There is a lot of good and interesting stuff here, but I feel like it gets bogged down by everything else. Just starting off with some purely nitpicky and personal takes, the editing in this movie just does not help with my opinion of it. And when I say that, I do partially mean this frame-by-frame editing style that the movie's going for. I get that it's trying to look like a comic book, and I applaud the effort, but seeing this right after I watched Across the Spider-Verse for the third time really just hit home how much better this editing style has been done since. In animation, and especially in static comic pages, this style really helps the medium come to life. But here it almost flattens it. The other issue with the editing is more nebulous and harder to quantify, but it bears mentioning nonetheless. The pacing in this movie is just so bad. I'm sorry, it is. I don't just mean the general scene pacing, but individual scenes are paced poorly as well. I get that this movie is meant to be a slower, more methodical character study, but that doesn't mean it has to be I don't know, boring? I know this is subjective, but this was one of my biggest issues with this movie. It feels like if every scene had just a minute or so of runtime shaved off, but they kept all the same content, it would feel much more natural. Because even the action scenes, which are usually the most viscerally exciting scenes in any movie, are sluggish. It's so weird. I think that is a pretty good transition to my main complaint with this movie. It feels like two movies are fighting each other to be the focus of the runtime, and both are losing. On one hand, you can really feel the movie trying to be a character drama that delves into Bruce's psyche, looking at his traumatic experiences and trying to see what made him who he is as a person. And you know what? That is not a bad idea at all, especially with Bruce Banner and the Hulk. In the character's over 60 years of history, there's been a lot of interesting work done with the relationship between Bruce and Hulk. The nature of who the Hulk is and how Bruce Banner's past made him who he is the core focus of many of the best Hulk comic runs, including stuff like The Immortal Hulk. So I don't want people to think that I don't like the idea of a really smart and personal Hulk story, because I do. I just don't think this movie completely succeeded at that. For one thing, I've always found the most interesting Hulk stories to be ones about internal conflict, in the most literal sense of the word. One of my favorite parts of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes was seeing how Hulk and Bruce Banner were two distinct characters who clashed and had distinct motivations. So we would get really interesting dialogues between the two of them. In Hulk, the closest thing we get to that is this weird dream sequence thing.
Puny human.
I'm pretty sure that's the only line of dialogue that Hulk has in the entire movie. And for the rest of the movie, we have no reason to believe that Hulk is anything other than just Bruce Banner, but in an angry rage. Not like what the comics suggest. The other thing is, and this is totally personal, I think, but Bruce's actual internal conflict just doesn't work for me. It starts really good, I think. The seeds about the relationship with his father, and generally just how comically fucked up his entire backstory is, really presents some interesting points, and I think that Eric Bana gives a pretty great performance. I could say that for pretty much everyone in this movie, actually. I think everyone gives a great performance. But for me, it just all kind of falls apart when Bruce is taken to the desert. Pretty much after that, it just feels like the movie is unraveling, and the fight between the soulful drama and the action set piece just end up kind of not working for me on any level by the end. So my main compliment of the Absorbing Man v Hulk fight is that it is directed really well. I really like a lot of the shots here. It just doesn't feel climatic or emotionally resonant, personally. Now, it may seem as though from all this very critical discussion that I hate this movie, which isn't true. There is a lot of stuff I really do like. As I mentioned, Eric Bana's performance, as well as all of the other performances from the cast, really sell a lot of what this movie is going for. I do really respect that it went for the much more dramatic and personal angle, even if it didn't really work for me in the end. While I don't like the overall pacing, a lot of these scenes are really good. Like, just for a random example, this conversation between Bruce and the exec guy that caused him to Hulk out. And I gotta respect those CGI dogs because they are clearly meant to be fucking terrifying, and on that front they absolutely succeed. This is clearly a film that has a lot of passion put into it, which is why I'm sad that it just overall doesn't really work for me. But hey, I'm not the only person who you'll be hearing the opinion of in this video. So perhaps it would benefit us to hear a different perspective on this movie.
Hey, me. Hulk slaps. So I do agree with a lot of the points TSD's just made. I think there's a lot of stuff here that makes for a confusing and disjointed watch, but Hulk's kind of like a magic eye poster. If you look through that surface level, there's a second film underneath, and it's amazing. Hulk is a film about trauma right from the start. We see the tragedy at Desert Base, the collapse of Bruce's family, or rather we don't see it, it's behind a door. We and Bruce can only watch the shadows dance beneath the frame, and then nothing. Technically, this is a flashback. It's a nightmare the teenage Bruce is having. But we see flashes of this moment again and again. It's stuck, frozen in Bruce's mind. The start of the film is slow. It's boring if you'd walked in expecting a Hulk film. But this is a Hulk film. The pace may seem borderline glacial, especially to the viewer of 2023, but if you know what the film is, if you accept you're not seeing anyone big and green for a while, it's really interesting. The first chunk of the film is about Bruce. The second chunk is about Hulk. The end is about both. So here, we're just spending some time with two daddy issue scientists dealing with those issues coming back into their lives, directly and symbolically. The symbolism's made a little more overt in the really neat gamma bomb sequence we see upon Bruce's irradiation. We see repressed memories starting to work their way loose, all in a thoroughly dreamlike presentation. This whole start is rich and impressive, given that it succeeds in making Bruce Banner interesting, wholly apart from the big green guy. If the movie had continued like this for another hour, no army, no smashing, no absorbing man, I would have been happy. But of course it does not. The cool thing here is that Hulk's clearly just an intensification of Bruce's existing issues, of that existing, frozen, traumatized kid persona. An hour or so in, we even see the moment the gamma bomb goes off, breaks that kid off from the rest of Bruce's brain, and traps him forever in the aftermath of his mother's murder. And that's not entirely metaphorical. Bruce, and his dad too for that matter, had a unique physiology, resulting from experiments David had performed on himself. It seems, somehow, the gamma release in this moment turned a mental imprint into a physical one. When that imprint is triggered, brought on once more 30 years later by a similar gamma dose, that frozen boy reappears in Bruce's psyche, unrepresses himself, and somehow, that biological imprint combines with the new gamma blast and the nanomeds Bruce and Betty had been working on to transform Bruce's body into a distorted, hulking physicalization of Kid Bruce's flash-frozen mindset, full of rage, trying to win the fight, wanting desperately to reach control through this, to be able to stop his dad from wrecking his family, protect his mother. The Hulk is just that kid, picked out of that moment, brought forward 30 years into a body that's capable of taking control, of winning the fight. A personified version of that doll Bruce had seemingly mentally displaced that part of himself onto. But that flashpoint didn't just stop the clock for a part of Bruce.
It was as if she and the knife merged.
It also seems that process was mirrored in some way in David. Make no mistake though, these two, their baggage, very different. Main difference being, for David, it's all about him. He wasn't worried about Bruce's future when he learned his altered genes were passed on, he was worried about his. He makes it clear toward the film's end that he's not interested in helping his son, he's interested in helping himself.
Now son, listen to me. I found a cure. For me. My cells can transform too. But unlike you, they're unstable. So, I need your strength.
Even his whole scientific advancement motivation comes from a purely egoistical place.
I tried to improve on the limits in myself. To improve on nature, my nature, knowledge of oneself. It's the only path to the truth that give men the power to go beyond God.
But that confidence is misplaced. His perception is askew. This, again, is obvious in that flashback flashpoint. He thinks his son is dangerous, so he tries to kill him, polishing off his wife in the process. He is the danger here, but he'll never be able to see that, and this is where we still are, 30 years on. Literally, when this comes to the surface, father and son are once again at Desert Base, where that fateful frozen moment happened. The question becomes, can we break out of that moment? Is Bruce able to move past that recurring nightmare? Is the Hulk able to evolve beyond Bruce in the moment he saw his mother killed? The answer, yes. But we'll come back to that, because first we've got the kinetic highlight of the piece. The Hulk versus the army sequence, beginning as the military destroy his household. Symbolism. And continuing with a cross-country chase. But this sequence isn't senseless violence. It's a kid frozen in time, lashing out, channeling his fear through his hands like he did all those years ago. Because he's not the aggressor here. He just wants to get away. That is clear throughout. He's not the danger. He's not the monster. The army is. Symbolism. That's the idea, anyway. The sequence sequence is overlong, and a bit too into the destruction. And I get it, you need Hulk smash scenes for a Hulk film, but this is one of the points where that action film versus thoughtful meditation tension muddies things a bit. That being said, there is plenty of food for thought here too. If the army is the real monster here, if the army did destroy Bruce's household, then how should we understand Bruce's bond with Betty, the general's daughter? I don't really know. Look, this whole spiel I've been giving you for the past few minutes is a provisional reading. Really, I'm still in the early stages of figuring my interpretation of this Magic Eye second layer out. When I agreed to pop up in this video, I was ready to trash talk Hulk, based on a 10-year-old memory of watching this film, seeing only that topmost part, and being bored and underwhelmed. Then the other day, I rewatch it for this, and I'm blown away. But to be honest, I'm happy having this half figured out. I made the decision to write this section still in that state of partial understanding, of seeing 1,000 different possibilities behind every unturned stone, because I think that kind of partial understanding fits the film. Hulk never seems to have a rock-solid grasp on its own ideas either. They're always shifting around, bubbling up, half-formed, half-visible. The poet Percy Bysshe Shelley once wrote that the mind in creation is as a fading coal, the idea being that even the greatest writers among us, sus, can't ever translate the full glory of inspiration to the finished work, that any piece or writing is a feeble shadow of the feeling that inspired it. This idea is kind of why I'm keeping my thoughts very loose here. The more I boil things down, work it all out, the more that coal fades. And the most important thing I want to get across here is the heat Hulk provides, because it does. This film is a feast for the faculties, so I'm not really sure about the reading I'm laying out here, but how's this for an idea? A handful of critics at the time called elements of the film Freudian, and that's a label people love to throw about at anything remotely deep and psychological, but what if it fits? Don't worry, we're not going to get remotely theoretical. I'm not going to lay out some hackneyed reading of David as the id, Bruce as the ego, Betty as the superego, or anything like that. No, we're cutting straight to the Oedipal complex. Bruce's girlfriend is his mum. Seriously. That's not literal, of course. The point is that Hulk sees, in Betty's similar appearance, and in her similarly caring bond with Bruce, that yes, his mother may have been killed, but that not everything of her, of his experience with her, is lost. Love still exists in the world. He can still feel it, can still remember her, can go on to rebuild that happy family he lost with others. In short, Hulk doesn't have to stay frozen in that moment of trauma. In remembering his mother, he's able to pick up where he left off. This is what we see in the San Francisco sequence. He can move forward through connections outside of himself, in a way his foil, his father, cannot. Those inward issues David's struggling with, they're still here, and David isn't trying to move past them. He wants things to stay frozen.
I didn't come here to see you. I came here to see my son, my real son. The one inside of you. I gave you life. Now you must give it back to me.
He wants to keep self-aggrandizing. David throws out a lot of mythic waffle toward the film's end, full of thematic non-sequiturs.
Long before the pale religions of civilization infected humanity's soul.
And it seems like this is the film buckling under its own runtime, trying to shove some consciously big ideas into the piece at the 11th hour, but if you look past the specifics of what he's talking about, it is just more of the same, more self-centeredness, bordering on self-deification. He hasn't reached beyond himself, found that past good in the present like Hulk Bruce has. He hasn't tried to do any of this. It's still all about him. He is still frozen.
You know what's beyond your boundaries? Other people.
The final fight is dark and somewhat incomprehensible in terms of visuals and, well, everything else. But again, if you look through this mess, it is possible to see this conflict being resolved.
And give me all of your power.
You think you can live with it?
Take it!
You want my anger? Hulk and Bruce seem to say together. Take it. Absorb it. Feel the depths of my raw emotion, the pain you caused, the pain you cannot understand. Feel it. Feel that bearing it is beyond you, that you aren't God, you aren't the center of reality. Understand it. Be confronted by the fact that your inward focus, your lifetime of selfishness has stripped you of the ability to reach beyond yourself, to experience basic empathy, to withstand yourself the damage you've done to your own son. And the moment David, the absorbing man, tries to absorb this, receives it, reaches beyond himself, he is undone. Look, the film's not perfect, but I do think that some of those imperfections are interesting in their own right. The film's probably most remembered for its wacky editing, which is near uniformly derided. TSD criticized it a few minutes back, and fairly. It doesn't look good, but it does add something that can be read in interesting ways. For example, we see it mostly in the Hulk POV sections of the film. If Hulk is that childish memory thrust into Bruce's body, the fact that the sections of the film seen from his perspective tend to fold and flip themselves into an approximation of that kid-friendly format of the comic book surely adds some meaning here. Betty's role leaves something to be desired here too. Jennifer Connelly's great, of course, but outside of her trip to visit David, hers is an awfully passive role. Not quite the damsel in distress, but not quite not that. She's mainly of symbolic importance here, which is cool, but also more, please? At times, it does feel the script's not quite sure what to do with her. Her conclusion is cutting her dad off. This weighty gesture of rejection, of moving on, that fits quite nicely, but it sort of seemed like she'd done this already at the film's opening. This time, the message gets through though, which is nice, I guess. The film's perhaps drawing a little too loosely on the DID underpinning the whole Hulk deal too. This does feel a lot like pop psychology, but even if it isn't really how this stuff works, it is still a fascinating watch, and as a result, there's a substance and depth here that's missing in a lot of modern superhero fare. Not all of it, not your Spider-Verses, your Logans, your Eternals, but, well, superhero cinema has come a long way since Hulk. Great strides have been made in how to construct consistent, clear, enjoyable stories from these larger-than-life elements, but it's hard to be sure we've not lost something along the way. That uncertainty, that wildly inventive X-factor by which a Hulk film becomes a slow-burn psychological drama. Either way, I've been waffling long enough. That's my Hulk take. Go watch Hulk.
Huh. I guess there is more than meets the eye when it comes to this movie. Or at least when it comes to what can be read from it.
Dr. Banner, melted by gamma rays, turned into the Hulk.
and glamour rays.
When I set out to make this video, I had very little actually in mind. I knew that I was going to collaborate with Pillar and that he had a vaguely negative memory of it, and I really knew nothing else. So with my reading being written after a first viewing and Pillar's being written after a second viewing, it paints a really interesting picture of this movie and the people who watch it. I mentioned at the beginning of my analysis that it was really hard to get a general consensus on this movie, and through showcasing two different perspectives in this video, I think I figured out why. This movie, as Pillar so eloquently put it, never has a rock-solid grasp on its ideas. And while that can make for a frustrating and boring experience such as the one that I had, the vagueness with which it applies those ideas makes it ripe for meaningful interpretation, as Pillar detailed. He used the metaphor of the magic eye picture, or autostereograms as they're officially called, to describe how this movie felt. I would see it almost more like a modern art piece, at least in the terms of how people interact with it. I'm going to completely butcher this pronunciation, but one person can look at Mondrian's composition in red, blue, and yellow and find one meaning, while another can look at it and find an entirely different meaning. And yet another person will look at the design and see a bunch of colored squares in a random design. It's not a very straightforward movie, and that can make it hard to enjoy for some, including me. But to me, that ultimately is what gives it the most credit. This is not me disregarding my own criticisms. I still stand by most, if not all, of what I said before. And this is subjective, but I wish that the movie was a bit more enjoyable to watch for me, even if it wasn't straightforward. Call me pretentious, but this is the reason that I really like Wes Anderson movies. Because while they're not always straightforward with exactly what their point is, I still find them really enjoyable to watch for the filmmaking and aesthetic. However, the fact that people can read something meaningful out of something I didn't enjoy or didn't get much out of is what I love about art. Every piece of media out there is available for someone to interpret, and all of those interpretations are true. That is what gives art meaning.
But I think we can both agree this film is way more interesting than The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, you got me there. Thank you so much for watching this video. I was really surprised with where this one went, but I'm glad it went in this direction. Special thanks to Pillar of Garbage for being a part of this video. If you like my content, you'll probably like what he does. And he uploads significantly more than I do, so feel free to check out his channel in the description below. Or in the little doobly-doo up there that should have shown up at some point during the video. I'd also like to thank my patrons, who should be appearing on screen right about now. Every little bit helps support my work, and if you're interested, you can get some really cool perks, including but not limited to being on the end screen of all of my videos, and also getting early access to said videos, plus many more. If you're not interested in doing that but still want to support the channel, feel free to like the video, comment any thoughts you may or may not have had, share it with anyone you think might like it, or just subscribe for more of that sweet, sweet content. It seriously helps support the channel a lot and would mean the world to me. Be sure to check out my socials, including my community Discord server, my Tumblr blog, and my Letterboxd, all of which are linked down below. I sincerely hope I made your day just that little bit better. And I guess we'll see you in the next video. Bye! Jellyfish, cloud.